All right, so this is my final ballot for the last debate that we've covered. This is just going over the third debate on the universal health care argument between Avik Roy and Professor Bill Sage. So I have to say, after watching this debate, I'm going to have to give my ballot to Mr. Roy. I thought that both sides made some good points, but I think that overall Roy built the stronger argument. He did a better job supporting his claims with actual evidence and explaining why that evidence mattered and, responding to Professor Sage's points. I'm going to explain my decision. I'm going to cover a few topics that we've covered in class with the modules like the Tola model, flipping the warrant, and hasty generalization. Instead of getting into it, I would have to use the first concept, which is the Tola model. And we've covered that a few times. And we talked about how every strong argument really needs a good claim, grounds, and a warrant. And the claim is your main point. Obviously, the grounds is what evidence is supporting that. And the warrant explains why the evidence is supporting your claim. So I thought Roy did a better job using this model overall. I thought Professor Sage made some strong claims that the healthcare system is already heavily funded by the government and that the current system already has major problems. And he gave a good amount of facts to support this idea, but I just didn't think that he explained it. He didn't really explain why, moving to a single payer system would solve these problems. For me, he didn't really just, cover all the bases there. But Roy, on the other hand, his arguments felt more complete. He used examples from other countries like Switzerland, Germany, the Netherlands, and he explained how those countries provide universal health care while still keeping private insurance involved. He also explained how Switzerland gives more financial help to lower income families and less help as people's income increases. So to me, that just connected his evidence back to his claim, which made his argument stronger under the Tola model. And then moving on to that, we have flipping the warrant. And in the modules, we've covered that instead of only attacking someone's evidence, you can challenge the reasoning that connects their evidence to their connection. So I thought Roy did a really, really good job at that when they moved on to the COVID portion of that argument. Professor Sage argued that the pandemic showed why American healthcare doesn't really work and how it took some hits. Now, Roy, he didn't really just disagree with them. Instead, he challenged that reasoning behind the argument by pointing out that other countries, it wasn't just America that struggled during the pandemic. Excuse me. So, yeah, he used other countries like the United Kingdom and Italy, and he pointed out that those countries also struggled during the pandemic. And his overall point was that the poor COVID outcomes weren't caused by only the type of healthcare system that a country had. And, I thought that was an effective way of flipping the warrant because it really just challenged the logic behind Sage's, argument. He wasn't just saying, no, you're wrong, and that was it. He says, I don't really agree with that because if we look at, other countries during this time, they also had some struggles. And then moving on to my last point, which is a hasty generalization. This happens when someone makes a broad claim based on limited evidence or assures something is true in every situation. So I thought this came up when Professor Sage talked about Medicaid. He described it as a successful program, but Roy argued that the situation is it's just more complicated than that. He used examples like California and New York when it came to states that use Medicaid because they pay doctors much less than private insurance. And due to that, many doctors don't accept Medicaid patients, which then leads it to people not getting the care that they actually, deserve and require. So Roy's point was good because just because someone has Medicaid doesn't mean that they always have good access to health insurance or health care. I thought that those examples show that calling Medicaid successful, calling Medicaid successful everywhere is just a broad claim. It wasn't, exactly true. And another thing that I liked about Roy's approach was that he acknowledged the current healthcare system has problems. He wasn't pretending that everything's perfect. That reminded me of one of the models that we use in class because instead of completely dismissing the other side, he recognized some common ground before explaining why he thought the solution was better. I thought that he made his argument pretty reasonable and balanced because he, was acknowledging one side while, still going with his own opinion. So overall, I thought both debaters did a really good job. They were both, very well prepared and they made very good and insightful arguments. Professor Sage did a really solid job pointing out the issues with our current healthcare system. But I thought Roy did a better job just backing up his ideas in general. And he even had the evidence to go and support his claims. He also challenged the reason behind some of the Sage's arguments and avoided making, claims without support. He had whenever there was an argument made that he didn't necessarily agree with, he had, the right approach to saying why he didn't agree with them. He wasn't just saying like, no, I don't agree with that, and that's that. So, due to all of that, I'm gonna have to say that Roy is the clear winner for me on this debate.